The road was 1.5 miles long, and she had never once questioned who owned it. That was the thing she turned over later, standing at the gate with her 2 bags and the pale first light just breaking through the oaks along the fence line. She had walked this road every Tuesday for supplies. She had watched it turn silver under rain, and red-orange in October, and white with frost on the 2 mornings cold enough to warrant it. She had treated it the way you treat a road, as a given, a route, a thing the world provides. The gate at the Forsyth end and the general store at the town end and 1.5 miles of gravel between them, and Benjamin Lewis had never once asked whose name was on the deed. She was about to find out. But that came later. The road came later. First there was the cottage and the kitchen and 11 weeks of work that someone had already decided would come to nothing. The cottage had 2 rooms and a window that faced east. Benjamin had taken the position in late September, when the light still slanted warm in the mornings, and the Forsyth estate looked, at first glance, like the kind of place where a person might settle into something. The advertisement in the regional paper had been straightforward. Live-in housekeeper, full-time, cottage accommodation included, tenure of employment, accommodations contingent on position. She had read that last phrase twice. She understood what it meant. She had signed the agreement with clear eyes and moved in on a Friday with 2 bags and a small wooden box that held her mother's sewing kit and 3 books she reread when she could not sleep. The work itself suited her. She was organized without being rigid, thorough without requiring praise, and she had a housekeeper's particular relationship with a room. She understood it as a space in use, not a space to admire. She polished the dining room table on Monday mornings. She managed the linen press, the larder inventory, the weekly accounts for the kitchen, and the fire in the main sitting room, which drew badly and required a specific technique with the damper that Gerald Forsyth had never mastered and never tried to. She learned the house in the way she learned most things, by paying attention to it rather than asking it questions. Diane Forsyth was her employer and her landlord both, which Benjamin understood to be a particular kind of arrangement. Not unkind on its face, simply concentrated. Diane ran the estate the way she ran every room she entered, as a stage on which she was the organizing intelligence, and everyone else was furniture or function. She was not cruel in the theatrical sense. She did not raise her voice. She simply spoke to Benjamin in the tone she used for the vacuum cleaner and the calendar, a tone that assumed the thing addressed would comply without needing to be considered. Gerald Forsyth said little. He moved through the house like a man who had long since learned that the shortest distance between any 2 moments was silence. He thanked Benjamin for his coffee on the mornings Diane was out. He did not thank her when Diane was present. Ruth Cale ran the general store at the road's town end, and she was the only person in that stretch of Benjamin's life who spoke to her as though she were a person rather than a position. Ruth was small and direct, with grey-streaked hair she wore in a knot that was rarely fully secured, and she had opinions about weather, about the regional council, about the sourcing of coffee beans, and about the people who lived in the district, most of which she delivered without solicitation, and all of which she stood behind fully. She had been running the store for 19 years. She knew everyone on the road. When Benjamin came in on Tuesdays for supplies, Ruth always made her a cup of coffee before she started filling the order. And that cup of coffee was, for 11 weeks, one of the more reliable things in Benjamin's day. Marcus arrived on a Thursday in the middle of October, 6 weeks into Benjamin's tenure at the estate. He came up the road on foot, which was unusual, carrying a clipboard and wearing work clothes that were clean, but not new. Canvas trousers, a grey shirt, boots that had been resoled at least once. He identified himself at the gate as a land management contractor checking boundary markers along the eastern fence line. He said this to Benjamin because she was the one who answered the gate, Diane being in town and Gerald being somewhere on the property with his thoughts. Benjamin looked at the clipboard, then at him. "Do you need anything?" she asked. "Water or a place to wait if Mrs. Forsyth's the one you need?" He said water would be welcome if it was no trouble. It was no trouble. She brought it out to the front porch in a glass, not a paper cup, because the paper cups were for the worksite Gerald kept near the barn, and she was not in the habit of diminishing ordinary courtesy. Marcus drank it standing at the porch rail, looking out at the fence line he had, apparently, been checking. He thanked her without the particular formality that sometimes arrived with gratitude when people felt they were being a burden. He thanked her the way you'd thank someone who had simply done a sensible thing. That was all, that first day. Diane returned, saw the contractor, and addressed him with the careful courtesy she extended to tradespeople she was not certain she could dismiss, which was a different courtesy than the one she extended to Benjamin. Marcus spoke with her briefly about the eastern fence markers, gave some information about the property boundary at the northeast corner that Diane filed away in the folder she kept for estate matters, and left down the road on foot before 4 o'clock. Benjamin watched him go from the kitchen window and thought nothing particular about it. The rainstorm came the following Tuesday, which was already Benjamin's day for the supply run to Ruth's store. She had been at the gate when the sky went the wrong colour, a flat, uniform grey that pressed down rather than gathering from one direction, the kind of sky that meant the rain would be serious and would stay. She went back inside for her rain jacket, which did not help much, and was a quarter-mile down the road when Marcus appeared from the fence line, carrying a roll of survey tape and moving with the particular alertness of someone who has read the sky correctly and still not reached cover. She called over to him without thinking about it. "There's a porch roof," she said. "It doesn't reach much, but it reaches enough." They sat on the covered portion of the front porch for 40 minutes, while the rain made itself known. She had brought the kitchen accounts with her, meaning to review them on the walk, and she set them in her lap and went through them without ceremony. He sat on the other end of the porch bench with the survey tape in his hands and said, at intervals, things that were worth saying. He asked about the east-facing window on the cottage and whether it gave good morning light. He said the county had reclassified 3 parcel boundaries the previous spring, and that the Forsyth fence line at the northeast corner was about 6 feet short of where the survey of record placed it. He mentioned that the road through the estate had an interesting deed history. She looked up from the accounts at that. "Interesting how?" she asked. He seemed to consider the word he had chosen. "Old," he said. "Long-standing." She did not press it. The accounts required her attention. The rain required patience. Both of those things she had in reasonable supply. When the rain slowed, he stood, thanked her again, this time with the same unhurried plainness as before, and walked back toward the fence line. She went on to Ruth's store, arriving late enough that Ruth gave her a second cup of coffee to compensate and asked whether she had been caught in the downpour. "I found shelter," Benjamin said. Ruth looked at her with the attention she reserved for answers that were technically complete. The weeks that followed had the texture of a routine that is working well enough to feel permanent, which is the thing about routines that should not be trusted. The feeling of permanence is the routine's own creation. Benjamin polished the table. She managed the larder. She kept the fire drawing in the sitting room. On Tuesday mornings, she walked the 1.5 miles to Ruth's store, sometimes in good weather and twice more in rain. She saw Marcus 3 more times along the fence line, twice from a distance and once close enough to exchange a few words about the northeast corner survey and whether the county had responded to the boundary reclassification query he had filed. Each time he thanked her for the water and the porch, with a brevity that did not make the thanks feel small. Each time she told him it had not been any trouble because it had not been. Each time she noticed, without attaching anything particular to the noticing, that his hands on the clipboard were clean and precise in a way that seemed slightly at odds with fence work. She noticed it the way you notice something that does not quite fit, and then set it aside, because the fitting or not fitting is not your concern. It was in the 6th week of November, a Wednesday, that Diane's manner shifted. Not dramatically, not in the theatrical way cruelty sometimes announces itself. It was a shift in register, a cooling, a briskness where there had been a certain flatness before, a tendency to leave specific silences in the kitchen that Benjamin was evidently expected to fill with acknowledgement. Diane moved differently through rooms where Benjamin was working, as though Benjamin's presence in those rooms had become something to be noted rather than relied on. Gerald said nothing. On a Thursday morning, Diane told Benjamin that the week's kitchen order should be scaled back, as they were reducing their hosting for the season. Benjamin adjusted the order. She did not ask why. On the following Tuesday, Diane summoned her to the sitting room after breakfast. She did not offer Benjamin a seat. She stood near the fireplace with the folder of estate matters open in her hands and said that she was making some adjustments to the household arrangements. She said this with the measured pacing of someone who has rehearsed a speech by removing everything from it that required justification. She said Benjamin's position would end at the close of the month. Benjamin stood at the sitting room threshold and held the news the way you hold something hot, not tightly, and with the knowledge that you will need to set it down soon. She asked, plainly, what had prompted the decision. Diane said that it was an estate matter, and that the terms of the original agreement, which Benjamin had signed, were clear about tenancy being tied to employment. She said she trusted Benjamin would handle the transition with the same efficiency she had shown in her other duties. That was all. Benjamin returned to the kitchen. She finished the morning's work. She did not behave differently for the rest of the day. The following morning was the one that cracked the floor. She had risen early, as she did most days, to start the sitting room fire before Diane came down. She was in the corridor near the back of the main house, carrying the ash bucket, when she heard Diane's voice from behind the half-closed door of the estate office. Gerald's low responses came and went. The voices were not raised. The words, however, were distinct. Diane was saying that the timing was right, that the arrangement had always been designed to run through the autumn, that she had been quite deliberate about choosing someone who would manage the departure without a scene. She said the phrase, "without a scene," with the particular satisfaction of someone who has assembled a situation to specification. She said she had known from the first week that the fit was temporary, and that she had told Gerald as much, and that Gerald had done nothing as was his custom. Gerald said something Benjamin could not fully hear. Diane said the word "convenient" twice, in a way that made it the sentence's entire weight. Benjamin stood in the corridor for a moment. Not frozen, not crumbling. The ash bucket was in her left hand, and she lowered it to the floor with the same precision she brought to everything she set down. And she stood there for 10 seconds by the clock on the corridor wall. And then she picked the bucket up and continued to the fireplace. The fire took on the 3rd match. She kept working. She did not tell herself a story about what she had heard because she did not need one. The story was already complete. She had been chosen because she would leave without argument. She had been useful, and she had been temporary, and both of those things had been determined before she arrived, and the determination had been made about her character before her character had been given a chance to mean anything at all. She took 11 more days. She finished the month cleanly. She kept the table polished and the larder accounted for and the fire drawing in the sitting room. She packed the cottage on the last 2 evenings, folding each item with the care she brought to everything she folded, setting the wooden box with her mother's sewing kit and her 3 books at the top of the second bag. On the last night, she washed the cottage's 2 teacups, set them on the sill, and did not need to tell herself she was leaving something in good order, because leaving things in good order was simply what she did. Gerald knocked on the cottage door at 8 in the evening, the night before her last morning. He held a sealed envelope that contained the final portion of her wages. He did not meet her eyes for more than a moment. He said he hoped she would settle well wherever she landed next. He said it in the voice of a man reading from a card he did not write. She took the envelope. She said thank you without any particular inflection, and closed the door gently because the hinge had always squeaked when closed too quickly, and she had never fixed it, and now she would not need to. She was at the gate by first light. The morning was cold in the specific way of mid-November, clear, with frost on the fence posts and the grass along the road's edge still white where the shadow had held overnight. The 2 bags sat at her feet. The road ran ahead of her through the oaks and then opened into the stretch of open field before the town appeared at the end of it. She had walked this road 47 times. She did not count it as hers to walk, never had. She counted it as the route between where she had been and where she was going. She picked up the bags and started. The 1.5 miles took her 35 minutes, which was longer than usual because of the bags and because her breath made clouds in the cold air, and she was not in a hurry. She was not going anywhere urgent. She was going to Ruth's store because it was Tuesday and because Ruth was there, and those 2 things were reason enough. She passed the second fence post on the eastern side, the one with the survey tape she had seen Marcus tie off twice. She did not stop. She noticed it the way she noticed things, specifically, and without making anything of it. The store appeared at the road's town end like a fact. Its wooden sign read, Kale General in letters that had been repainted within the last 2 seasons, darker at the center where the brush had been full and lighter at the edges. Smoke was already coming from the chimney. The light in the window was warm and yellow and solid. Ruth was at the counter when Benjamin pushed the door open, and she looked up with the expression of a woman who had been expecting someone and was prepared for the conversation she guessed was coming. She did not say anything immediately. She set down the pen she was holding and moved the order book to one side and then put the coffee on without being asked. Benjamin set her bags by the door. She finally did it, Ruth said. Not a question. End of month, Benjamin said. Ruth made a sound in the back of her throat that was not quite a word. She put 2 cups on the counter and filled them. She pushed one toward Benjamin and held the other with both hands, the way she did when she was thinking through something she had already thought through but was choosing to approach again from the start. Have you made any plans? Ruth asked. Not yet, Benjamin said. I have enough for 3 months. I'll find something. Ruth looked at her. Then she looked at the window. Then she looked back at Benjamin in a way that was different from the first look, more specific, as though she had found the angle she had been searching for. She said, I need to make a call. She took the telephone from behind the counter, the one that sat next to the register and a small card-indexed file of suppliers and local contacts she had maintained in the same handwriting for 19 years. And she dialed a number that she appeared to know without checking the index. She turned slightly toward the back of the store, not far enough to be private, and when the call connected, she said, in a tone that was practical and not urgent, She's here, she's at the store, she's got her bags with her. Benjamin drank her coffee and did not ask. Then Ruth said, Marcus. She said his name the way you say a name when it is a name you know well, and the person on the other end of the telephone knows it too. Not the name of a contractor who had recently been engaged to check a boundary marker. Not the name of a man who fixed survey tape to fence posts and sat on borrowed porches during rainstorms. The name landed in the warm store air with the weight of something that had been waiting to land. Benjamin set her cup down carefully. "Ruth," she said. Ruth finished the call and put the telephone back. She took her own cup from the counter and held it for a moment without drinking from it. Then she went to the old filing cabinet beside the back wall, the one Benjamin had always assumed held 19 years of supplier invoices, and pulled open the second drawer and removed a brown envelope that was sealed and had a handwritten label on the front. She set it on the counter. "He asked me to hold this," Ruth said. "He asked me to give it to you when the time came." She paused. "He was certain about the time, which I found irritating, but he was not wrong." Benjamin looked at the envelope. She read the label. The label said her name written in a clean, specific hand that she recognized from a clipboard held on a rainy porch 2 months prior. She opened it. Inside was a single document, 3 pages, and a note on plain paper that said, "The road runs both ways, and you were always the one making it worth walking." There was a line below that said the property transfer had been registered with the county 3 weeks ago, which was before Gerald Forsyth had been given the words to deliver, and before the sealed envelope with the wages had been brought to her cottage door. The document was the deed. The road, 1.5 miles of gravel from the Forsyth estate gate to the front edge of town, had been deeded out of Marcus Hale's name and into Benjamin Lewis's, recorded formally, filed properly, with a date stamp on the cover page that showed it had been registered at the county office on a Thursday in late October. She read the date again. Late October was 6 weeks before her dismissal. It was 4 weeks after the rainstorm on the porch. Ruth watched her read. Benjamin turned to the second page, then the third. She was not a person who needed to read a document twice to understand it, but she read this one twice because the first read felt like receiving information, and the second read felt like understanding what the information meant. What it meant was this: the road she had been dismissed down, the road that had been the physical expression of her departure from a place that had decided she was temporary, the road she had no claim to, the road she had walked 48 times, now counting this morning, had been hers for 3 weeks before she set foot on it today. "He owns the whole stretch?" she asked. "Has held it 3 years," Ruth said. "Bought it when the county reclassified the parcel boundaries. Kept it quiet. People assumed it was a public route because nobody ever stopped them using it." "Why?" Benjamin asked. Ruth gave her the look again, the one that meant the answer was available, but Ruth was going to let her get to it on her own. Benjamin thought about the porch. She thought about the clipboard and the clean handwriting, and the survey tape on the second fence post. She thought about the way he had described the road's deed history as old and long-standing, and the small, contained pause before he chose those 2 particular words. She thought about the Thursday in late October, 4 weeks after they had sat out a rainstorm together, when he had apparently driven to the county office and filed a property transfer in her name. She thought about a man who had been checking fence lines on foot, in canvas trousers and boots that had been resoled, who asked about the light from her east-facing window and thanked her for water in a plain glass, as though it was exactly the right thing to receive. The store door opened. Diane Forsyth came in with the particular energy of a woman who has identified a problem and arrived to resolve it. She was dressed for town in the deliberate way that signaled official business. Her coat buttoned to the top, her gloves still on, carrying the estate folder. She had presumably driven down the main road, not across the property road, which meant she had already made some decision about the property road that she was here to communicate. She stopped when she saw Benjamin's bags by the door. She said, in the measured tone she used for things she expected to close quickly, "I see you've made it as far as the store." Ruth said nothing. She picked up her coffee cup. "I came to speak with Ruth about the road access going forward," Diane said, now addressing Ruth, which was the particular courtesy she extended to people she needed something from. "I'll be putting the gate at the property end under formal notice. The road runs across estate land and the public has been using it on tolerance, which we've decided to revisit." Ruth set her cup down. "The road doesn't run across estate land," Ruth said. Diane looked at her with the expression she wore when someone had misunderstood something she had stated plainly. "The road runs from the estate gate," Diane said. "It has done for decades. It's been maintained by our agreement with the county." "The road runs through a separately deeded parcel that was sold out of county hands 3 years ago," Ruth said. "It's been in private ownership since then, just not yours." Diane turned. She looked at Benjamin, then at the envelope on the counter, then at the document in Benjamin's hands. The folder in her arms shifted. She straightened it. "That's not possible," she said. She said it in the tone of a woman who has always found that certainty delivered with sufficient confidence will reorganize reality to match. It was not a tone that worked in Ruth's store. "The transfer was filed in late October," Ruth said. "You're welcome to call the county clerk." Diane looked at Benjamin directly. There was a moment in which she appeared to search Benjamin's face for something that would give her a foothold, some reaction she could use to reposition herself in the room. Benjamin's face did not provide it. Benjamin looked back at her with the same level attention she had brought to every morning in that house, every polished table and accounted larder, and fire laid and dinner served. And Diane found nothing there she could use because Benjamin had never arranged her expression for Diane's benefit. "Who?" Diane said, and then stopped. She started again. "Whose name is on that transfer?" Benjamin held the document. Before she could answer, the store door opened again. Marcus Hale stepped in from the road. He looked at the room with the unhurried attention that Benjamin recognized from 40 minutes on a porch in the rain. And he looked at Benjamin first, the way a person looks at the one thing in a room they came specifically for, and then he looked at Diane Forsyth. He said, "Mrs. Forsyth." Not unkindly. The way you say a name when acknowledgement is all you are offering. Diane's folder slipped. She caught it. She straightened it again. She said, in a voice that had lost its organizing confidence and was operating now on reflex, "I wasn't aware you had any business here." "I have business on the road," he said. "I own the road." There was nothing theatrical about the way he said it. He said it the way you say a thing that is simply true and has been true for 3 years and does not need volume or posture to remain true. Ruth made a sound that was not quite a word and turned slightly away to address a shelf behind her that did not need addressing. Diane looked at him. She looked at the document in Benjamin's hands. She said, "I see," in a voice that was working very hard to sound as though she did. She opened the estate folder. She closed it. She looked at the window. "The road has functioned as a public access route for 20 years, she said, and it came out smaller than she intended, the sentence carrying the particular diminishment of an argument that knows it has already lost. "People have used it freely because I didn't restrict it," Marcus said. "That was a choice I made. The road is not public." Diane said, "I don't understand why." And the sentence broke a little at the end because she was not asking about the road's deed history, and they both knew it. Marcus did not answer that. He looked at Benjamin. "I should have told you sooner," he said to her. "I was not sure when we first talked that the timing was right. By the time I was sure, the papers were already filed." Benjamin looked at him for a moment. "When did you file them?" she asked. "3rd week of October," he said. "Thursday. 4 weeks after the rain. 4 weeks after a glass of water on a porch. 4 weeks after she had gone back inside, and he had walked back to the fence line, and she had thought nothing particular about it. She thought about what he had seen on that porch. Not a performance, not a presentation. A woman going through kitchen accounts in the rain because the accounts needed doing, extending a covered roof to a stranger because it was raining and the roof was there, saying thank you when he thanked her without the reflexive dismissal of the genuinely modest or the careful absorption of someone cataloguing the impression they were making. He had seen her being the same person she was when no one who mattered was watching, and apparently someone had been watching. "You bought it 3 years ago," she said. "I did," he said. "You've been managing it all this time." "I have." "And the fence line work," he said. "There is actual fence line work. The northeast corner survey is genuinely 3 years out of date." He paused. "The fence work gave me a reason to be on the road." Ruth made the sound again and turned more decisively to the shelf. Diane Forsyth stood at the edge of the room. She had stopped straightening the folder. Her gloves were still on. She was looking at the space between Benjamin and Marcus with the expression of a woman whose map of a territory has just been contradicted by the territory itself, and who has not yet found the revised version of the map that will allow her to navigate it. She said, "I'm not certain what the legal situation is with regard to access." "You're welcome to consult a solicitor," Marcus said. "The transfer is filed. The road runs to the town edge. Access from the estate end will be at the owner's discretion." "The owner?" Diane said. She looked at Benjamin. Benjamin held the document. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The sentence that would have settled the room was already settled, not by a speech, but by the fact of a deed that had been filed before Gerald had knocked on the cottage door with a sealed envelope, before Diane had stood at the sitting room threshold and said it was an estate matter, before any of it. 3 weeks before she had been escorted off the property, the road she was being escorted down had already been hers. Diane set the estate folder on the end of the counter, which was a small surrender, the gesture of someone who has stopped pretending the folder contains what she needs. She looked at Gerald, who had followed her in silently, and was standing near the door with his hat in his hands and the expression of a man who had been present at many things he wished he had been absent from. Gerald said nothing. Diane said, "Well." And then she said it again, as though the second time might clarify what the first had left unresolved. "I suppose we'll need to renegotiate the access arrangements." "That would be sensible," Benjamin said. It was the first time she had spoken in several minutes, and the room registered it the way rooms register a sound after a long quiet. Her voice was level. She did not adjust her face for the occasion. She said it as plainly as she had said everything else she had ever said in Diane Forsyth's presence, which was to say, she said it the same way she said anything, as a true thing, and nothing more than that. Diane took the folder from the counter. She buttoned the top button of her coat, which was already buttoned, and then seemed to realize it, and did not adjust it further. She said goodbye to Ruth with the particular courtesy she used for people she expected to need again. She said nothing to Benjamin. She said nothing to Marcus. She walked to the door with Gerald's silent company at her back and pushed it open into the cold November morning and was gone. The door settled in its frame. Ruth looked at it for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee cup and looked at Marcus, and then at Benjamin, and she said, in her driest voice, "I'll put more coffee on." Benjamin looked at the document in her hand and then at Marcus. He had not moved from his place near the door. He was watching her with the attention she recognized now for what it had always been. Not the attention of a contractor looking at a property situation, but the attention of a person who finds another person worth watching closely and is patient enough to do it for as long as is necessary. 3 weeks, 6 weeks. However long it took for the situation she was in to deliver her to a place where the document made sense. "I should have said something on the porch," he said. "In the rain," she said. "Yes." She thought about that. "I would have thought you were strange," she said. "On a first meeting, giving someone a road." "You would have been right," he said, and the corner of his mouth moved in the way she now understood she had seen before, on the porch when she had gone back inside for the kitchen accounts. She looked down at the document again. 3 pages, filed in late October, the date stamp in the corner, her name in the prepared line of the transfer form in the careful handwriting she had seen on a clipboard by a fence post on a grey October morning. He had written her name into a legal document before she had any idea there was a document, before she had any idea there was a road. "The road runs both ways," she said, reading from the note. "It does," he said. She looked at the window. Outside, the frost had finished melting from the road's edge. The gravel was pale in the risen sun, and the oaks at the Forsyth end of the road were small and bare and distinct against the white-blue November sky. Ruth put 2 more cups on the counter and filled them and pushed them toward the pair of them without a word. And Benjamin set the document on the counter and picked up the cup and held it with both hands, which was how she held a cup when the coffee was very good and the room was exactly the right temperature. And she looked at the road through the window with the specific attention she'd given it every Tuesday for 11 weeks. It was the same road. The gravel was the same. The oaks were the same. The frost pattern on the verge had been the same since the first real cold of November. What was different was what she understood about it now. Not the road, the standing. The road had always been running beneath her feet in both directions, and she had been walking it one way, and now she was at the center of it, at the town end, at Ruth's counter with a cup of coffee in her hands, and the road ran back toward a gate that had been used against her and forward into whatever came after, and both directions were hers. Marcus picked up his cup. He did not say anything further about the road or the deed or the filing date or the fence line. He stood beside her at the counter and they both looked at the window, and Ruth rearranged something on the shelf behind them that had not needed rearranging, and the store was warm, and the frost was gone from the road's edge, and the morning was November and clear. And Benjamin Lewis stood at the town end of her own road with her bags by the door, and a document on the counter, and a cup of coffee in both hands. And she was not going anywhere urgent. She was already where she was going.